BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Ciao and guten Tag. This is the Scottish Football Podcast. I'm Phil Goodlad, speaking European for you this Tuesday, the 22nd of October, because today we're all going continental.
Tierney plays it across. It's half away. McTominay! The stuff of dreams for Scotland!
With Scots seemingly taking over the Italian top flight, we'll get the latest on the Serie A Scottish contingent. And we're also going to be heading to Germany.
Football is about dreaming, isn't it? You know? And I think you're entitled to dream as a football fan.
We're talking Aberdeenkusen and finding out what the Dons can learn from last season's shock Bundesliga winners.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sport Scotland.
Bonjour, bonjour, bonjour. I promise you I'm not going to speak any more European, which I would imagine you will be delighted at. But I can't say that for my guests. Derek Rae, lead Bundesliga commentator for worldwide viewers on ESPN, and Alasdair MacKenzie, our Rome-based Scottish journalist who can give us the lowdown on the Italian Scots abroad. Gentlemen, good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Morning.
Derek, it strikes me that you and I are talking just days after I cleaned my phone. And on my phone, I saw pictures of bratwurst, of schnitzel, of those little beers that we were all drinking in Cologne back in the summer. And then I stumbled across pictures as we left the stadium that night against Hungary. And I just saw total dejection. So it's bizarre that I speak to you having just cleaned my phone of the Euros just a couple of days ago.
Well, the memories weren't great from a Scottish point of view. If you think back to what happened ultimately in Stuttgart, that game against Hungary, slightly better as far as Cologne was concerned, and Scotland at least managed to get a point from that game against Switzerland. But the memories, I think, will last for a long time. If you ask every Scotland fan, they had a terrific time. Just a shame about the actual performances by the national team. Yeah. But the fans were the stars and are still fondly remembered up and down Germany for their performances.
Yeah, I'm hoping that by deleting my photos, I now can just give it up and move on. Alasdair, hello in the wonderful world of Milan where you are. You have your work cut out for you following the Scots this season.
Yeah, that's right. We've had a few more arrive. It's always, ever since I arrived in 2018, it seems like they've continuously been following me over, which has been quite nice. But now we've got a record number. And then this weekend, we actually, for the first time ever, had 3 Scottish players on the same pitch in a Serie A match when Napoli faced Empoli. So it's been great trying to kind of keep track of what they're all up to now, because there's quite a few of them.
Well, my first mea culpa of the morning is I said that you were based in Milan. Of course, that's not strictly true. You're in the eternal city. Before I make any more mistakes, let's crack on with the Scottish football headlines. St Johnstone have signed Scotland international Barry Douglas on a free transfer, the well-travelled left-back, most recently at Polish side Lech Poznan. Rangers midfielder Tessel Midag says she and more than 100 other players felt they could simply not stay silent after they signed a letter calling on FIFA to end its controversial partnership agreement with the Saudi oil company Aramco. They want the governing body to reconsider on humanitarian and environmental grounds. UEFA has been urged to make meaningful change for disabled football fans by the charity Level Playing Field. And as Celtic prepare to face Atalanta on Wednesday, midfielder Paulo Bernardos insists the 7-1 loss to Dortmund in their last Champions League game is out of their system and they've learned from the experience.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sport Scotland.
Derek, let's start with you. You're a Bundesliga commentator, but you're from the Granite City where the Northern Lights are always out. This term Aberdeenkusen that you've been using on social media of late, you better explain to us what this means.
Well, Aberdeenkusen, it's a bit of fun, to be honest. It's an intersection of my two worlds, being from Aberdeen and covering the Bundesliga week in, week out, and having seen what I saw, which was Leverkusen's very first Bundesliga title victory last season. They did it on the back of an unbeaten domestic campaign. And, the similarities are there when you think about the start of the last campaign. Yeah, there were a few of us who believed in Leverkusen. We knew it was a very good team on the up with Xabi Alonso as their coach, with Simon Rolfes as the sporting director, some excellent players. But they were fighting against the juggernaut that is Bayern, who had won 11 Bundesliga titles in a row. So, again, they play in red. They won a European trophy back in the 1980s. Does that sound familiar at all to fans in Scotland? A team in red that won a European trophy, actually 2 European trophies, if you want to be strictly accurate, back in the 1980s. So, yeah, Aberdeen. And, we've seen what Aberdeen have done so far this season. Can't argue, can you, with 13 wins in a row, and then going to face the defending champions, Celtic, the team that tends to win the Scottish top flight title. And so I just sort of see this synergy between the two, between Aberdeen and Leverkusen. And, we'll see if the Dons can keep it going. The other funny thing is, if you go back to last season, one of the key results in the first half of the campaign was Leverkusen going to face Bayern, going to face the mighty Bayern in Munich, and coming away with, you've guessed it, a 2-2 draw. So after the 2-2 draw on Saturday, I sort of thought, if anybody believes in numerology, if they watched the Bundesliga last season, the styles are not the same. They don't play the same brand of football, which maybe we can get into. But I think anybody who is not a Celtic fan, and maybe even some Celtic fans, are crying out for a different narrative. And whether that is Aberdeen running Celtic close or ultimately managing to beat Celtic and win the title, it would be more interesting, wouldn't it? And we all were of that view last season. It was the best Bundesliga campaign I've ever covered. And Leverkusen won it running away with almost a record points total.
I was speaking to somebody at the weekend after Aberdeen's 2-2 draw, and they said that was a good result for the BBC. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, well, you can still go on for at least another week about this title challenge after only 5 minutes of the season. And that there is almost like this sense that maybe there is too much being made of this unbeaten start by Aberdeen. Can I just press you to the fire right now, Derek? Is this a get-out clause for you at the end of the season to say, when Aberdeen are crowned champions, well, I told you after 7 games it would happen because I saw it with Leverkusen last season? Or are you saying, actually, there's just so many things that's similar here, let me be the first one to point them out to you?
I don't know if it's either, to be honest. I think it's more, it's a bit of fun. First of all, it's a lot of fun, and football is meant to be fun. And I do think in our Scottish culture, we take it far too seriously a lot of the time, and I'm guilty of that as well. I've had a few Celtic fans come onto me on social media saying, how ridiculous this is, that, how can you say that kind of thing? And you're completely overrating Aberdeen. Well, I'm not trying to overrate anybody. I'm merely trying to say that, in most countries, you do eventually hope for a title race. And there's a lot to admire about what Aberdeen have done. And they brought in a new coach in Jimmy Tellin, and he has brought his own style to Pittodrie, which again is different. Gegen-pressing style, not fully formed, but that is the way he plays. That's been his history with Elfsborg.
Speak to us about gegenpressing, because I'm fascinated by these terms that come from European football, because it always seems so new and so radical. But actually, what we're witnessing is something that's been around since the dawn of the game.
Well, yes and no, Phil. I think, on the one hand, there's not an awful lot that's new in football. But on the other hand, Aberdeen went out and got a coach who has a concept. And they watched what he did in Sweden with Elfsborg. And when we talk about gegenpressing, it is a German concept. So again, this is dear to my heart. Now, they didn't play full gegenpressing against Celtic at the weekend, but they were probably never going to. But what is it? Well, essentially, if you think about the way Liverpool have played under Jurgen Klopp these last few years, it's about the transitional moments in a game. So it's about the moments when possession changes hands. And a lot of German teams have adopted this style. It's certainly very closely associated with what Leipzig have done, with what Ralf Rangnick brought to German football with his initial ideas. We saw it in Hoffenheim as well. And so it's about what happens when you win the ball back. And the idea is, when it's done at its best, you win the ball back high up the pitch, and then you have the short route to go. Now, that doesn't happen by accident. People always say to me, well, why didn't they just press them high? Well, you can't just sort of say, yeah, I'm going to press a team high and then win the ball, and then it all happens magically. It's something that takes a lot of work on the training ground, needs a particular kind of footballer to make it work. And so the signings are done accordingly. And Taylene hasn't had a chance to do that yet. So he's getting a tune out of players who were there before and, has, as I say, used that style to an extent. But what I would say is just imagine how good things could be once he does get to make that style fully formed. And when the squad is more complete, when the Aberdeen sporting division, and again, from the German point of view, the sporting division is really important because they sign the players. The sporting director and his staff sign the players and come up with the signing strategy, not the coach. He's the person who implements the philosophy, and the idea is that you're all on the same page with that philosophy. So it's always a work in progress. We've seen signs of it from Aberdeen so far. Against Celtic, they sat in really, didn't really play counter-pressing or gegenpressing in the first half, but we saw a bit more of it in the second half. And I'm just intrigued by what may happen as Aberdeen evolve along the way with Taylene and with this approach, because that is his concept.
So quickly, Derek, what you're saying is that this season Aberdeen will win the league, but next season, when they get everything properly up and running, they'll probably win in Europe as well.
Well, football is about dreaming, isn't it? And I think you're entitled to dream as a football fan. I obviously wouldn't go all the way down that road. What I would say, though, is that Aberdeen, and I think they are doing this, but when you're in a situation like Aberdeen are at the moment, where you've won all these matches in a row, where you've gone to Celtic Park and you've drawn, you do have to think down the line. And that's what a German team would do under these circumstances. You would think about what happens next season. You plan for the best. You plan for the possibility of a group stage run in Europe, whether that's the Europa League, whether that's, Champions League might seem pie in the sky, but you plan for all of that. So, you think about it in the past, Scottish teams who are not Celtic and Rangers have often landed in Europe and then sort of thought, okay, what do we do now? What do we do now? Who do we sign now? Because we're in Europe. And it's a bit of a sort of a last minute panic exercise. The idea is that you have your ideas in place. You know what you want to be. You know who you are already with this coach. And, the other part of this too, Phil, is that you lose a good coach from time to time. I was talking to Fernando Caro, the CEO of Leverkusen recently. I was with him at a big event and sat with him for more than an hour. And he said, we never go long without talking about who the next coach would be. They have Xabi Alonso right now. Chances are they may lose him at the end of this season or the end of next season. So they're always having a discussion. Who is the next coach? So that is what has to happen as well for a team like Aberdeen. You don't just live in the here and now and say, yeah, everything's great. Okay, let's wonder how it's all going to work out in May. You're constantly planning and thinking about the future from a position of strength, and that's where Aberdeen are right now.
From Germany, let's head south through Austria to cross the border into Italy. I feel like Alan Wicker reading that out. Because it appears you can't move for Scots in Serie A this season. In fact, history was made at the weekend. Empoli's game with Napoli became the first in the Italian top flight to feature 3 Scottish players on the pitch at the same time. It's rich pickings for the Rome-based Scottish journalist Alasdair MacKenzie. Scott McTominay, Billy Gilmore, Liam Henderson, all involved in Napoli's 1-0 win on Sunday. How significant, Al, was that moment, seeing 3 Scots on the pitch at a Serie A game?
Well, it was amazing. I mean, I think it goes to show how, Liam Henderson will probably see himself as being the trailblazer here because he's the one who's been around for the longest. He's the one who's moved to Italy, I guess, was the boldest call coming relatively early in his career and at a time when this was highly unusual to make this kind of step outside of the comfort zone of Scottish football or English football. But what we've seen in the years since is that not only have Scottish players started to have the confidence and belief that they can make this transition, but clubs, certainly here in Italy, have started realising that that is a market that's worth looking at, where you can find talents, you can find young talents, you're not going to have to pay as much as you would in other leagues, and that these players are adapting really well because almost every example of Scottish players moving to Italy in the last 5 or 6 years has been a success. And obviously some more successful than others, but there haven't been any flops. So that has been great to see. It's not just that we're getting the quantity of players coming over from Scotland to play in Serie A, Serie B, but when they're here, they're actually making a real impact. And a lot of them are kind of staying for years as well. I mean, Henderson being the obvious example.
Is the current influx that we're seeing in Italian football of Scots, Alasdair, is that down to the early trailblazers like a Liam Henderson, or is it more to do with a sort of a Lewis Ferguson who left Scottish football as a really good player but has just kicked on and become, now part of the Scotland setup?
Each example you can kind of take on its own merits, because I do think Aaron Hickey's move made a big impact. I mean, Bologna's sporting director himself has spoken about this, that the success of Hickey's move when he joined Bologna from Hearts and then made an instant impact, and within a couple of years was sold back to the Premier League at a huge profit. That gave them confidence. I think it gave Verona confidence to make a move for Josh Doig, for example. But Napoli's moves this summer, I think, are a bit different because they're bringing in actual established players rather than taking punts on guys who don't have that kind of top-level experience yet. So Scott McTominay's signing was considered really a bit of a coup in Italy. I mean, there's been all sorts of comments about how they can't kind of believe that Man United let a player like that go. And Antonio Conte has spoken very openly about, from his time in the Premier League, how much he's appreciated watching Billy Gilmour, how he very quickly identified him as a player who he wants to bring to the club. So their moves are seen slightly differently because they're already at that level. They're already Premier League established players who are Scotland internationals and so on, whereas a few of the other moves have been seen differently as gambles, I guess, that have worked out in the most case. And Lewis Ferguson has been a massive success. I mean, he's so unfortunate, really, with the timing of his injury, because I really do believe he would have made a really good impact and helped Scotland out at the Euros, given the season he just had. But, you know, being midfielder of the year, helping them qualify for the Champions League for the first time in 60 years. And after that season that Bologna had, we saw the rest of the spine of their team, because that was Calafiori, Ferguson and Xerxes, really the spine of that success. And Calafiori and Xerxes both got Premier League moves, which is something Ferguson has said he has an ambition to do. And he may well have got that himself were it not for that injury. But thankfully, it looks like he's going to be back on the pitch quite soon and is feeling quite positive about it too.
Alasdair, let's quickly just focus on individuals. Billy Gilmour, his first start in Serie A, you saw last weekend since making a switch from Brighton. Was he a standout?
It was quite difficult for him, to be honest. He Conte said after the game that he struggled a bit. Napoli had a tough time. It wasn't really Billy Gilmour's fault, but they were away to an Empoli side that have been really one of the surprises of the season so far. They hadn't conceded a single goal at home all season long, and the only goal they did concede in this game was from a penalty. So I think Napoli were caught a little bit by surprise, particularly in the first half. That's how it looked anyway. And Gilmour was struggling to kind of dictate the tempo and run the game in the way that he likes to. So Conte was still pretty positive about him after the game, even though it wasn't a match where he was a standout player. He did say that he's growing into things and that he's a big fan of him basically as a player. But Gilmour is going to have to seize these chances really, because he is in this 4-3-3 that Napoli have now transitioned to. He is definitely the kind of number two to Stanislav Lobotka, the Slovakian playmaker, who's had a really, really good start to the season. So for Gilmour to usurp Lobotka in that starting 11 and get more regular opportunities from the start, he is going to have to be making a huge impact in these games.
Can I ask you as well about Scott McTominay playing that game as well alongside Billy Gilmour? Of course, Scotland national eyes on that pairing. Scott McTominay, more of a standout at the beginning of his career in Italy.
Yeah, he's been a huge hit and seen as a real coup by Napoli to get him. He's a player that they're already familiar with as a former Manchester United player who's been playing in the Premier League international football. It's been funny watching how much attention is being paid to the Scotland team in the Italian press since these moves, particularly down south. And actually, McTominay's goal against Portugal in the last international break ended up on the front page of Il Mattino, which is the Neapolitan newspaper, which was a funny thing to see. But he's started really well. He's scored a couple of good goals. He's instantly been put into that starting 11. Conte's actually kind of changed his formation since McTominay arrived as well to a 4-3-3, and he is seen as someone who can bring more goals from midfield. And so I think they are looking to unleash his attacking qualities, which was something they really lacked last season. Napoli was goals from midfield. So McTominay is seen as someone who can provide that, and so far he's made a really positive start.
A couple of others quickly. Shea Adams, Torino, they lost, was it 3-2 to Calgary last time out?
Yes, that was a pretty bad result for Torino. They got off to a really good start, but have struggled a bit recently. And Shea Adams likewise started brilliantly, made a really good impact. And the real shame was that his partnership with Duvan Zapata, ex-Atalanta striker, looked immensely promising at the start of the season. But Zapata has since ruptured his ACL and is out for the rest of the year, basically. So Torino have been kind of scrambling to work out how to deal with that issue. Zapata's their captain as well as their first choice striker, and now Adams is having to try and strike up a new partnership, which is a shame for him because they were really playing off each other really well. But even so, he has got off to a really good start there, and Torino are kind of a steady team. I don't think a huge amount is expected of them, but they shouldn't really be fighting relegation. And they are scoring goals this year, which is good for Shea Adams too, because in previous seasons under their previous coach, that was always their biggest issue. Whereas now they've taken their foot off the brake a bit and they're playing a bit more expansively. So that's good to see from his viewpoint.
Alasdair, just very quickly, because time is beating us, I'm afraid. Our regular update from you on Lewis Ferguson. Where is he with his recovery from injury?
He gave an interview last week with one of the papers over here about his recovery and said that he hopes to be back on the training ground by the end of October. And within 2 or 3 weeks after that, feels like he will be able to be back on the bench for Bologna again. So hopefully, all being well, within the next month or so, before the end of the year, certainly we should be able to see Ferguson again. And this interview was very interesting in terms of an insight for really how difficult the whole process has been for him, how heartbreaking it was for him to miss the Euros after the year that he'd had, his kind of fears around not being able to get back to the same level after not being able to walk to begin with after surgery and so on. But sounds like now he's feeling a lot more confident and upbeat about things. The Bologna team he's walking back into is a very different team to the one that he was in when he picked up the injury, because they've lost their coach Thiago Motta to Juventus. And Vincenzo Italiano, who replaced him, has a different philosophy and plays a different style of football. I do think Ferguson will still be welcomed back and seen as a key player when he does return to that team, but it'll be interesting to see how he adapts to Italiano's football, which is a bit more expansive, a bit more attacking and open, but so far hasn't really been getting the results in the way that Bologna were managing last season.
Well, that's all we've got time for. We'll have more from Alasdair tomorrow, actually, as he'll help us preview Atalanta against Celtic in the Champions League. We're making him work for his money, Alasdair MacKenzie. For now, though, thanks to him. Thanks also to Derek Rae from earlier in the episode. Really interesting insight from him as to the comparisons between Bayer Leverkusen and Aberdeen. Remember, we're here with new episodes of the Scottish Football Podcast bright and early every weekday for you, so make sure you don't miss out. Subscribe at BBC Sounds. Have push notifications turned on in your phone. A European football podcast special can only be ended one way. Arrivederci. Ciao. Cheers, Inu. We'll speak again soon.
Just a quick reminder, the Behind the Goals podcast is available every Tuesday with me, Rachel Corsey, and me, Leanne Crichton. It's your one-stop shop for our take on everything that's happening in the world of football. Just head to BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts and search for Behind the Goals.